She was not sentenced, she was not tried, she was simply taken. No courtroom, no jury, no final words spoken in her defense, just a door closing behind her, and a life that would never fully reopen. It was the early years of the 20th century, a time when authority wore confidence like armor, and questions were treated as weakness. On that morning, the streets were quiet, too quiet for something permanent to be happening. She was young, not a child, not yet hardened by age. Her clothes were ordinary, her hands steady, her eyes alert, searching faces for explanations that never came. Two men stood beside her, not police, not quite doctors. They spoke politely. That made it worse. They told her she was being taken somewhere safe, just for observation, just for a little while, temporary, one of them said. The word hung in the air like a promise. She believed it. Most people would have. The building appeared slowly, as if it had been waiting for her. Tall, stone, dash-faced, windows arranged too evenly, like eyes trained not to blink. There was no sign welcoming her, no sense of arrival, only iron gates that opened without ceremony. As she stepped inside, the air changed, cooler, heavier, as if the walls had been holding their breath for decades. She turned once, instinctively, to look back. The gate closed, not loudly, not violently, just enough sound to be remembered forever. Inside, the hallway stretched longer than it should have. The walls were clean, but not comforting, the kind of clean that erased personality. Footsteps echoed hers, then theirs, then others she couldn't see. No one introduced themselves. A clipboard appeared, papers flipped, a pen scratched. She was asked her name. She gave it. It was written down, and just like that, it became something owned by the building. She was not screaming. She was not resisting. She was not dangerous. There were no restraints placed on her wrists, no urgency in their movements. That was the most frightening part. This was routine. They led her into a small office. A man sat behind a desk. He did not look at her when she entered. He read. Instead, she watched his eyes move across lines that described her in words she had never used. He nodded once. That seemed to be enough. She tried to speak. He raised one finger. Just a moment. The pen moved again. No one asked her what she wanted. No one asked her what she feared. No one asked her if she understood. She was asked only one question. Do you know why you're here? She answered honestly, no. The man did not look surprised. They told her she would stay for observation, that it was in her best interest, that someone would explain everything. Soon is a word that stretches. She was guided down another hallway. This one smelled faintly of disinfectant and something older, something that had never fully left. Doors lined the walls. Some were open, some were closed. From behind one, a sound drifted out. Not a scream, not a cry, something quieter, something tired. She slowed her steps. One of the men gently pressed her forward. Her room was small, a bed bolted to the floor, a chair that faced nothing, a window placed too high to see through. No mirror. She noticed that immediately. The door behind her closed. Then came the sound. Click, a lock settling into place. She stood there, longer than she meant to, waiting for footsteps to return, for clarification, for someone to say there had been a mistake. None came. Minutes passed, then hours, then the kind of silence that presses against the ears. That night she lay awake, listening not to chaos, to order, keys turning, footsteps timed to routine. Beds creaking in unison. This place did not panic. It processed. Days followed. She was given clothing that was not hers. Her own was taken away. For safekeeping, she asked when she could leave. They told her it depended on what. They did not say. She learned quickly what was expected. Stand here, sit there, speak. Only when spoken to, she complied. Compliance was rewarded with calm. Questions were met with notes. She never received paperwork, never signed anything, but her name continued to appear on forms she never saw. Signatures accumulated, authority stacked neatly upon itself. Outside, life continued. People walked streets, shops opened and closed, seasons changed. Inside, time behaved differently. Here, days did not move forward, they layered. She told herself this was temporary, that someone would realize the error, that she would laugh about this later. But every morning, the door remained locked. Every night, the light dimmed at the same hour, and slowly, the idea of later began to feel fragile. She had committed no crime. She had broken no law. She had been diagnosed with nothing she could name. Yet she remained, because in this place, explanation was not required, only permission. What no one told her that day was that this building did not exist to heal. It existed to erase. They called it a hospital, but nothing inside it was designed to make anyone better at first glance. The routines appeared comforting, predictable, structured, orderly. That was the illusion. Each morning began the same way. A bell rang, not loud, not gentle, just sharp enough to pull people out of unfinished dreams. Beds creaked as bodies rose together, like a single organism responding to command. There was no discussion. Everyone already knew what came next. Uniforms were handed out, not clothing uniforms. Identical fabric, identical color, identical fit. Individuality disappeared quietly, disguised as cleanliness. Her own clothes had names stitched inside them. These did not. Breakfast was silent, not because silence was required, but because conversation slowly died here. People learned that speaking attracted attention, and attention brought notes. Notes brought decisions. Staff moved efficiently. Too efficiently. They didn't rush. They didn't linger. They performed tasks the way factory workers handle machinery quickly, without curiosity. Patients were guided, not addressed. Instructions were spoken about them, never to them. She noticed how doctors spoke. They stood in groups, flipping through charts. She's compliant. Low agitation. Still suitable for observation. Pronouns replaced names. Diagnoses replaced stories. She stood only a few feet away, listening to herself being summarized like a problem that had already been solved. No one explained treatments. Some patients were taken behind closed doors and returned. Different. Quieter, slower, less present. Others were not returned at all. Their beds were cleaned by afternoon. The wards were overcrowded, beds pushed too close. Together, Curtains thin enough to hear breathing through. There was no privacy, but there was constant watching. Staff numbers never matched patient numbers. One nurse for dozens, one doctor for hundreds. Efficiency demanded shortcuts. Compassion took too much time. She learned the rules without ever being told. Do not ask about discharge. Do not ask about time. Do not ask about outside. Those who did were written down. Those who were written down were treated differently. Treatments were scheduled. Punishments were not. But the two often looked identical. A woman who refused to eat was assisted. A man who cried too loudly was calmed. Someone who wouldn't stop asking questions was sedated. Always for their own good. Always documented. Always justified. She tried to understand why she was still there. Days became weeks. Weeks became something longer. No one reviewed her case with her present. No one discussed improvement. There were no milestones, just continuation. One afternoon, she noticed something unusual. A stack of old records left unattended. She didn't touch them. She only looked. Names, dates, admission, years, discharge columns, empty. Page after page. Some names had been crossed out. Not discharged, removed. She asked another patient how long they had been there. The woman hesitated, then whispered a number. It was longer than she had been alive. Time inside. The institution was measured differently. Not in days, in decades. She watched new patients arrive, confused, hopeful, assured. It was temporary. She recognized her former self in their eyes, and she watched the same light fade. Doctors continued their rounds. They spoke confidently. They spoke clinically. They spoke as if cure was always just around the corner, yet no one ever left cured. Some left in wagons, some left through doors that did not reopen, most simply stopped being mentioned. The most frightening realization came quietly. There was no failure here. The institution was working exactly as intended. It did not exist to restore people to the world. It existed to remove people from it. She understood then why discharge was rare. Healing required belief. Belief required effort. Erasure required only time. People didn't leave this place when they were healed. They left only when the institution decidedly no longer existed. Her diagnosis fit thousands of women. That alone should have been terrifying. It appeared in her file. Without ceremony, no explanation, no conversation, no examination she could remember. Just a word, a label, written neatly, confidently, in a hand that had decided her fate long before she ever spoke. The diagnosis was not precise, it was not scientific, it was not even consistent. It was a term used often in that era, especially for women, a diagnosis flexible enough to mean anything, and specific enough to mean everything was wrong with her. It covered sadness, it covered anger, covered disobedience, it covered grief that lasted too long, it covered women who questioned authority, women who refused marriage, women who spoke too loudly, women who felt too deeply. There was no blood test, no scan, no evidence, just interpretation. She read the word again and again, trying to understand how it described her. She had been tired. Once, she had cried once. She had disagreed with someone in authority. That was all it took. She asked to speak politely, calmly. She explained that she was not ill, that she understood where she was, that she remembered her life clearly. that she wanted to go home. The doctor nodded and wrote something down. She did not know it then, but that moment changed everything, because the moment she defended herself, her defense became proof. She denies her condition. That was written next. Every word she spoke afterward was filtered through the diagnosis. If she cried, she was unstable. If she remained calm, she was emotionally detached. If she argued, she was aggressive. If she complied, she was resigned. There was no correct response. She began to understand the trap. Silence meant acceptance. Speech meant illness. She tried silence. It worked briefly. Doctors described her as manageable. Nurses stopped watching her so closely, but her file did not improve. Nothing ever improved a file once it existed. Then she tried explaining. Again, slowly, carefully, she spoke about her childhood, education. Her work. She spoke clearly, logically. The doctor listened, and afterward, the diagnosis was underlined. Her clarity was described as articulate delusion. Her logic was described as rationalization. Her memory was described as fixation on a previous identity. She realized something horrifying. Her identity now belonged to the institution, not to her. They spoke about her as if she were not present. She believes she is sane. She insists she remembers her life accurately. She shows emotional attachment to imagined freedoms. She stopped recognizing herself in their words. The woman they described was not her, but she was the only woman who officially existed. Over time, the language in her file changed, not drastically, subtly. She says became, she claims. She remembers became, she insists. She feels became, she perceives. Each word removed a piece of her credibility. She noticed how easily other women received the same diagnosis. New arrivals, different faces, different stories, same label. One woman had lost her husband. Another had refused to marry. Another had been found wandering alone at night. Another had spoken publicly against her family. All diagnosed the same. The diagnosis was not about illness. It was about control. She watched what happened to women who fought harder. They were marked as resistant. Their treatments became harsher. Their privileges disappeared. Their names were spoken less often. Eventually, they stopped speaking altogether. She tried to hold on to herself quietly. She repeated her name in her mind. She recited memories like prayers. Her mother's voice, the smell of home, the sound of streets outside. But time inside the asylum did not move. Forward it pressed inward. Years passed without being acknowledged as years. No anniversaries, no milestones, just continued observation. Her protests grew quieter, not because she believed the diagnosis, but because she understood its power. One day, she overheard a doctor speaking to a student. "Patients like her are interesting," he said. "They're convincing. That's what makes them dangerous. Dangerous for wanting her life back." From that moment on, she understood something essential. Truth did not matter here. Reality did not matter here. Only documentation mattered, and documentation favored authority. She stopped trying to explain herself, but even silence was recorded, withdrawn, emotionally flat. progress uncertain. There was no version of her that escaped the language. From that moment on, everything she said was recorded, and nothing she said was believed. The treatments were legal. That didn't make them humane at first. The word treatment gave her hope. It suggested intention. It suggested care. It suggested that someone believed she could be helped. She would learn quickly how misleading that word was. The first treatment required no consent, no explanation, no explanation, no warning. She was taken from her ward early in the morning, before most patients were awake. 2 attendants escorted her down a corridor she had never been allowed to enter before. The walls there were bare, the air colder. They did not speak to her. They never did during treatments. The room was tiled from floor to ceiling. A large metal tub sat in the center. Steam rose from its surface. Or perhaps it was just her breath. Cold baths, they called it, a standard procedure. Her clothes were removed. She was lowered into the water. It was not cold in the way winter is cold. It was violent cold. A shock so sudden it stole her breath, locked her muscles, erased thought. She tried to scream. Her jaw locked. The attendants held her down. A nurse checked her pulse. Her expression neutral, almost bored. Minutes passed. Then more. Time became meaningless inside that water. When they finally removed her, she could not feel her legs. They wrapped her in rough blankets and left her in a corner of the room to recover. No one spoke. No one asked if she understood why this had been done. Later, the doctor wrote, patient reacted strongly. Treatment effective. The treatments escalated. Isolation was next. A small room. No windows, no clock, no sound except her own breathing. She was placed there after speaking back to an attendant, not yelling, not resisting, just asking a question. How long will I be here? The door closed. Days passed. Or maybe hours. There was no way to tell. Food arrived silently through a slot. Sometimes it didn't. In isolation, thoughts grow louder. Memories become intrusive. Hope becomes dangerous. She began speaking to herself, just to hear a human voice. When attendants noticed, it was added to her file. Talks to herself. Increased signs of internal disturbance. Later came restraints. Lever, straps, wrists, ankles, chest. Sometimes for hours, sometimes overnight. She learned not to struggle. Struggling extended the time. Struggling was noted. Struggling was remembered. Then came the experiments. They were still called treatments. Early electrotherapy, crude. Machines, unpredictable results. Doctors, curious more than confident. She was told it would help calm her. Mind, she was not told what it would feel. Like that, the electricity did not calm anything. It fractured. Time, it erased minutes, sometimes hours, sometimes words. Afterward, she would wake unsure where she was, unsure what year it was, unsure if she had spoken recently or only thought she had. Her letters home began to change. At first, they were careful, polite, hopeful. I am receiving treatment, she wrote. They say it will not be long now. Months later, the handwriting grew uneven. Sentences shortened, words repeated. I am fine, she wrote. I am fine. Eventually, the letters stopped, not because she was forbidden to write, but Because writing required belief, belief that someone was listening. The institution tracked her response carefully, not her recovery, her response. Doctors began using a word they liked very much: compliant. She followed instructions. She did not argue. She did not cry during treatments. She did not ask questions anymore. Her file improved, but she did not. Compliance became the goal, not healing, not release. Patients who complied required less effort, less supervision, less explanation. They made the institution run smoothly. She watched other women learn the same lesson. Those who resisted were treated more aggressively. Those who complied faded quietly. She chose survival. Her personality flattened. The sharp edges dulled. Her laughter disappeared. Her anger followed, not because it was cured, but because it was unsafe. Doctors noted the change approvingly. Emotional range reduced. Behavior stabilized. She had never felt less stable in her life. One afternoon, during a routine check, a nurse asked her an unexpected question. "Do you know why you're here?" She paused. The wrong answer could cost her everything. She chose carefully. "They said I was ill." She replied. The nurse nodded and wrote it down. That night, she lay awake, understanding something devastating. Her survival depended on agreeing with the story told about her, even if it erased her. If this story already feels impossible to forget, stay with it. And if you want more forgotten histories like this, subscribe, because what comes next is harder to hear. After years of treatments, one change stood out. She stopped asking when she would be released, not because she no longer wanted freedom, but because she had learned the pattern. Everyone who asked paid for it. She entered the asylum in her 20s. She looked in a mirror again in her 60s. No, one marked the passing of time inside the asylum. Time existed. Of course, it just wasn't acknowledged. Days were measured by meals, weeks by laundry, cycles, years by nothing at all. Outside the walls, the world transformed inside. It stood perfectly still. She did not know when I've stirred had passed. There was no ceremony, no announcement, no moment where someone said, "You have been here 10 years." The realization came gradually. In fragments, her hands began to look unfamiliar. Veins more pronounced, skin thinner, movements slower. She assumed she was tired. She was always tired. News from the outside arrived rarely, and never directly. Snippets overheard from attendants. Comments between nurses. A headline glimpsed on discarded paper. A war had begun. A war had ended. Another followed. The asylum did not change its routines. Patients woke at the same hour, ate the same food, walked the same corridors. The outside world surged forward. Inside, time pooled and stagnated. Birthdays were not acknowledged, not with cake, not with words, not even with silence. She remembered the first one she noticed. She woke with a strange heaviness in her chest, a sense that the day mattered. She waited. Nothing happened. She did not mention it. Mentioning things had consequences. Family visits became infrequent at first. They were stiff but hopeful. Careful smiles, polite questions. "We're told you're improving." She learned to nod. Then the visits slowed. Months passed between them, then years. Eventually, no one came, she asked once. Has my family written? The attendant glanced at her. Then shook her head. No records. She said, the answer was delivered without cruelty, without kindness, just fact. She stopped asking. Mirrors were not common in the asylum. Polished metal served their purpose. Reflections, distorted, forgiving. One afternoon, while being escorted past an administrative office, she caught her reflection in a glass cabinet. It startled her. The woman, looking back, was old, her hair grey and thinning, her face lined deeply, her eyes familiar. And not, for a moment, she thought she was seeing someone else, another patient then. Understanding settled like weight. Decades had passed. The realization did not come with panic, it came with numbness, shock, required energy. She no longer had it. Her file changed over time, not carefully, not accurately. Her name was crossed out and rewritten. More than once, ink colors changed, handwriting, styles shifted. Sometimes her age was adjusted forward, sometimes backward, sometimes left blank. At one point, her birth year was altered, not maliciously, conveniently. The institution no longer knew how old she was, and it did not matter. She became a permanent resident, a fixture, someone who had always been there. New staff assumed she belonged to the building itself, like the walls, like the doors. They did not ask how she arrived. They did not wonder why she stayed. She had outlived doctors, outlasted nurses, watched generations of patients arrive and leave. She did not leave. Her memories thinned, not erased, but blurred. Faces merged. Dates collapsed. Certain names lost meaning. She remembered being someone before the asylum, but the details escaped her. The color of her childhood home, the sound of her mother's voice, the shape of her own handwriting when it was confident. Those things became impressions rather than memories. The institution recorded her decline clinically, cognitive, narrowing, reduced emotional responsiveness, but they never recorded the cause. Time, without markers, time without acknowledgement, time without witnesses. One night, she asked another patient a simple question. How old do you think I am? The woman studied her carefully, then shrugged. Old enough that they'll never let you out. That answer stayed with her. Eventually, even the idea of release lost meaning. Release to where? Release to whom? Everyone she had known was likely gone. Cities had changed, laws had changed. The world she came from no longer existed. The asylum had outlasted her life. She was not aging in the way people do in the world. She was disappearing slowly, her existence reduced to paper, 2 signatures, 2 margins, when inspectors came. Her presence was explained briefly. She's been here a long time. No further explanation required. Time did not heal her. Time did not free her. Time did not free her. Time erased her. An entire lifetime passed. No investigation ever followed. The most disturbing question was never why she was committed. It was why no one ever came to undo it. For 40 years, her confinement went unchallenged, not overturned, not reviewed, not questioned in any meaningful way. This was not because people didn't notice. It was because the system made noticing unnecessary at the time of her commitment. Families were taught to trust. Institutions, doctors were authorities. Hospitals were unquestionable. Women were expected to comply. If a doctor said a woman was unwell, the assumption followed naturally. She must be. Families rarely fought back. Some were poor, lacking resources to challenge medical authority. Some were ashamed, believing mental illness reflected moral failure. Others were relieved. A daughter labeled unstable could quietly disappear without scandal. A wife deemed difficult could be removed without divorce. A sister who asked too many questions could simply stop asking. The asylum offered an answer that required no further responsibility. She's being cared for. And so families stepped back. Years passed. Letters slowed, then stopped. The institution encouraged this distance. Visits were restricted. Updates were vague. Language carefully chosen. She's stable. She's responding to treatment. She's comfortable. None of it meant well. It meant contained inside the asylum. Doctors protected doctors. Records were written in professional language, ambiguous enough to discourage scrutiny, definitive enough to justify confinement. If one physician questioned another, it was handled quietly. Behind doors, in meetings without patients, records were sealed under the justification of privacy. In reality, they protected reputations. Once sealed, they stayed sealed. For decades, occasionally, someone noticed her. A new nurse, a junior doctor, a staff member who hadn't yet learned the rules. One such nurse asked a question that should have changed everything. How long has she been here? The answer was unclear. The file, inconsistent dates crossed out. Names rewritten. The nurse asked another question. Why? No one could give a clear answer. She began watching the woman more closely, noticing details others ignored: her calm demeanor, her ability to follow conversations, her quiet insistence that she did not belong there. She doesn't seem ill, the nurse said carefully. The words landed heavily. A review was requested. Not publicly, internally, quietly. The request was denied. No explanation given. The nurse tried again. This time, she documented her concerns, formally, in writing. Within weeks, she was reassigned, moved to another ward, another building, another institution. Her name disappeared from the staff roster. The message was clear: questioning confinement was more dangerous than enforcing it. The woman noticed the change, not immediately, but she felt it. The nurse stopped coming. Her small kindness vanished. Did not ask why. She had learned what questions cost. The institution remained untouched, its authority intact, its routines unchanged. Outside, society reinforced the silence. Mental illness was not discussed openly. Women's testimony was doubted. Institutions were assumed benevolent. Newspapers reported on asylum overcrowding, on funding shortages, on reform proposals, but never on individual lives lost inside. No one counted years stolen. No one audited forgotten patients. Her existence was reduced to maintenance, feed, monitor, contain. By the time reform movements gained traction, she was already invisible, a relict, an outlier, too old to relocate, too undocumented to release. She no longer fit into any category except remaining. When oversight committees toured the facility, she was described vaguely. She's been here a long time. No one asked how long. No one asked why. The system did not fail her. That is the most unsettling. Truth had worked exactly as designed. It absorbed inconvenience, neutralized dissent-protected authority, and it did so quietly, without cruelty, without drama, without witnesses. She was not forgotten by accident. She was forgotten by process. This wasn't one woman forgotten, it was a system functioning exactly as designed. She was released quietly, as if nothing had happened. There was no announcement, no ceremony, no acknowledgement of time lost one morning. Her name appeared on a list, not highlighted, emphasized, just typed among dozens of others. A clerk noticed an inconsistency. During a routine review, dates that didn't align, a confinement that extended beyond legal limits, diagnosis no longer recognized by modern standards. New laws had changed. Inspections were stricter. Paperwork mattered now, and on paper. She should not have been there. The correction did not come with emotion, it came with stamps. Signatures. A short meeting where no one met her eyes. She's cleared for release. Someone said. No one said sorry. She was told she was leaving the same way she had been told she was staying decades earlier. Briefly, without explanation, they gave her clothes that didn't quite fit, shoes she had never worn, a small bag containing what the institution believed were her belongings. Most of it wasn't hers. She walked out through doors she had not seen open in 40 years. The hinges groaned, the sound startled her. Outside, the world was too loud, too fast, too bright. Cars moved without horses. Buildings climbed higher than anything she remembered. People dressed differently, spoke differently, moved with urgency she could not match. She stood on the steps of the asylum, unsure what to do next. There was no one waiting, no family, no official escort, no plan. Freedom, she realized, was not a place, it was an expectation, and no one had prepared her for it. She was taken to a temporary facility, not a home, just somewhere to be placed. They asked her questions. Where would you like to go? Who can we contact? Do you have anyone? She did not know how to answer. Everyone she had known was gone. Parents, long dead. Siblings, untraceable. Friends, reduced to names she barely remembered. The world she returned to no longer recognized her, and she no longer recognized herself within it. She struggled with simple things, crossing streets, choosing food, making decisions without permission. For 40 years, every choice had been made for her. Now, choice felt like danger. She woke at institutional hours, waited for instructions that never came, sat still for long periods, unsure what freedom required of her. The records followed her, not publicly, but enough she was labeled formally. Institutionalized, a phrase that closed doors. Quietly, no apology was ever issued. The doctors responsible had retired. Some had died respected men, others had moved. on 2 careers untouched by consequence. The institution itself continued operating under a different name. Renovated. No one was held accountable. There was no compensation, no restitution, no acknowledgement that 40 years of her life had been taken without cause. Her survival was treated as sufficient resolution, but survival was not the same as justice. She lived out her remaining years in quiet obscurity, not because she wanted to disappear, but because the world had no category for her. She had not been insane when she entered. She had been inconvenient, misunderstood, silenced by authority. What the asylum did was not accidental, it was procedural. It relied on trust in institutions, on disbelief of women, on systems designed to protect themselves first. She was not unique. That was the final, most unsettling truth. There were others, names crossed out, files sealed, lives quietly erased. Her story survived only because a record was corrected too late, because a clerk followed a rule, because time changed faster than the institution could adapt. Most never got that moment. She died without fanfare, without recognition, without her story publicly told. But her life leaves a question. Behind how many doors closed just as quietly? How many people were processed, not treated? How many systems mistook obedience for health? She wasn't insane when she entered, but no one can live 40 years erased and come back unchanged. Stories like this weren't accidents, they were systems. If you want to uncover more histories that were buried on purpose, subscribe, because not every door that closed was meant to reopen.